You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical.
Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I'm Steph, and I have a very fun guest here with me today that you have heard from before and all really enjoyed the episode. So I am excited to have a part two with the author, but it is about a completely different book. So I am going to turn it over so he can introduce himself and let you know where you can find him online, and then we will start our chat about the newest book.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. I'm Nicholas. I'm the author of lots of things, but most recently, The Witching Stones, the lore and craft of the essential crystals, gemstones, and minerals to empower your magic, which just came out via Wiser Books not long ago. If anyone wants to learn more about me and my work, I kind of sit at this intersection between the scientific and the spiritual, the mineralogical and the metaphysical, if you will. And you can find me online at theluminouspearl.com or at theluminouspearl on most social media.
That is fantastic, and welcome back. And I am so excited that you have another book because I know this is something that we talked about in that episode. Was like, what's next? What's coming? And here it is. How are you able to come up with so many different ideas? Because like none of your books are repetitive, and I just love that. And I'm shocked.
Well, thank you. That actually means a lot because it's something that I really pride myself on trying to approach the kind of broader conversation about crystals, about minerals from more than one angle because, I mean, at the end of the day, rocks mean so many things to so many people, and they have for such a long time that I don't think I'm ever going to get bored writing about them because there just are unimaginably different perspectives and topics that we can uncover. So usually for me, what I like to do is take a look at what's relevant to my life, to the world around me, and kind of start with that piece. The other thing that will happen is quite often inspiration strikes in very strange places and you just follow that thread. So I often begin new books by teaching new classes, creating new curriculum, because I don't want to teach the same kind of 101 level entry class all the time. Those are important to do periodically at different times and places. But I want to have new and exciting things to talk about, often born out of my own experience or my own insights or where I'm at in my healing journey. So how can I kind of bring those things together for other people to engage with? And then sometimes as I'm putting that together, the universe kind of gives me that little nudge that says, hey, you should do more than teach a 2-hour class about this. You should probably turn this into a book. And frequently that's what happens.
I love that because I know that you have a huge collection, and I'm sure that it is very tempting to want to write about every single stone crystal that you have and like incorporate them all into one like 1,000-page book. But that just like wouldn't be feasible for somebody to read. But unless they're me, I would read that.
It is a challenge. We've got something like a little over 6,000 valid mineral species. But, when we say that, it doesn't take into account that rose quartz, smoky quartz, carnelian, tiger's eye, amethyst are all one species, quartz. So really, I mean, there are well over 10,000, 12,000 varietals once we apply the way they mix and match and change and have different folk names throughout time. So I'll never run out of content, and I will also never know everything. So part of the reason I keep, I won't say reinventing the wheel, but keep doing something new with crystals is because I'm always learning something new. The day I stop learning is the day I'm no longer here on Earth.
Excellent perspective and so true. So maybe this is more of a one-on-one question, but I think it's a good maybe like basis that we talked about your last book that specifically had crystals in the title, and then this one is called The Witching Stones. So is there a difference between crystal stones? You talked about that they're all minerals, they're all specimens, but is there specifically a difference in this book?
So I chose the word stone for a couple of reasons. One, I'm a nerd, so like there are maybe some etymological factors that went into this. The word stone comes from a truly ancient, like Proto-Indo-European root that means to congeal or to harden, and it's a word that today sounds very untechnical because it casts such a wide net, and it basically refers to solid bits of the Earth's crust and stuff derived from solid bits of the Earth's crust. So in the one sense, we when we say stone, we might be referring to rocks and minerals and mineraloids, things that don't quite meet the parameters of a proper mineral. But oftentimes the word stone carries the connotation of something that is somehow shaped or informed by human activity. So we think of stone tools and standing stones and gemstones. And these are all things that matter because of the human mineral relationship. I also, rather than using the word crystal in the title, I do talk about some things in the book that are not crystals in the strict or even the loose sense. Things like amber and jet are part of the geological record, but they're also organic materials. So they're neither crystalline nor are they minerals, and yet we find them sandwiched between strata of rocks because they're organic fossils. We've also got lead in the book, which is derived from mineral resources. It's the very first metal to be broken down from its ore in the course of human history, an unimaginably long time ago. And there's also this idea that stones are everywhere around us. So there are humble things like flint and some common fossils and something like salt, a really important mineral substance that's in every cell of our body and in our kitchen cabinets, and of course part of our materia magica. So by calling this the witching stones, it allowed me to find enchantment in a broader range of materials that represent, I think, a larger span of time and culture and magic than just things we think of as crystals today.
And it is such a broad term when you say it like that. Like there are so many things that could fit under this. So how did you, because there are 14 that you highlight in this book. So how did you possibly narrow it down to just 14 when you could pick from the whole wide world?
Well, I knew that I wanted 13 chapters in the book, and so that gave me some guideposts early on. And I also pretty much from the beginning knew what some of these stones were going to be. I kind of developed this idea for the book alongside teaching a class about flint. And one of the kind of driving forces in wanting to write a project like this was the fact that I spent 2.5 hours talking about flint and I wasn't done yet. There was still more of its magic and lore and kind of deep story that was available to us. And I needed a place to put it. So I kind of started by drafting a long list and starting with like who absolutely unequivocally has to be in there. Well, I need flint to be in there. I have to put in hagstones. I couldn't write this book without emerald. It would be a missed opportunity not to include quartz. And I think amber and jet should definitely be in there. And then it was kind of looking at my list and whittling it down and deciding how things were going to work. So amber and jet are a really great example. Rather than giving them separate chapters, they coexist as one chapter because in certain parts of human history, like up until about the 18th century and well into the 19th century in some places, uh, they were believed to be the same substance in two different colors. So they occupy the same kind of social and iconographic and ritual roles in many parts of the world. But at the end of the day, I chose the listing of stones that are in this book based on ensuring there was a widespread of materials from the kind of ordinary everyday to the very, very precious. I also needed all of the stones in the book to represent magic, to be overflowing with magical folklore and history and practical applications. And then, kind of dovetailing from there, the hope was that the spread of stones in the book would also represent a wide application of magic. So that way, there's something in this book to hopefully meet every need you might experience in your life.
I just have to say that I talked about a flint for 2 hours and still wasn't done is just like the happiest, nerdiest thing I have heard. I love it so much. It just like warmed my heart to hear that statement.
Flint is so wonderful. There's so much to it, and like the hominid flint relationship is at least 1.5 million years strong and continues. We still use flint in industry, in technology, in art, in so many different things. So naturally, there's a lot of folklore, there's a lot of belief, there's a lot of kind of mythological attributions toward flint, and I mean, I would like to say I did more than scratch the surface in this book, but there's so many examples I couldn't include because I didn't want like a 700-page book.
And so speaking of, scratching the surface, would the things covered in this book be suitable for beginners or for advanced practitioners, both who would benefit from this?
I try to write every one of my books from the framework that no matter your experience level, you can immediately apply the things within it to your life. So it is accessible for beginners. It's not so full of detailed instructive ritual that you're going to feel lost if you don't have a lot of background. But also, if you do have a lot of background, you're going to find new and creative ways to apply stones that you've probably not encountered. You're going to see this kind of marriage between their geology and natural history and the folklore in a way that generates new practical magical outcomes that are going to keep your practice exciting. So I really tried to keep both ends of that spectrum in mind because it's imperative that no matter where you are in your magical practice, you feel welcome. That is really important to me when I write, when I teach, when I just exist in spaces with other folks. You are always welcome at my table, no matter what that skill level is going to be. But also, I'm I do my best to cultivate a beginner's mind every day of my life, and that serves me as a so-called advanced practitioner. So by looking at things through a new set of eyes, through a new filter, advanced practitioners are going to take, I hope, quite a bit away from this book as well.
I appreciate that because I'm always, you know me, just collecting all of the all of the rocks, all of the shiny things, and I appreciate finding new ways to work with them because sometimes they just sit on my shelf and it's like, okay, now what do I do? And I feel like there's a lot of action forward steps in this book.
Yeah, I needed there to be operative magic, hands-on stuff. I don't think I've really written a book yet that doesn't have something hands-on about it. Even my little pocket encyclopedia, it has some ritual actions, we'll say, albeit in abbreviated format because of the structure of the book. But this gives you quite a lot. I think there's somewhere between 50 and 55 different spells, rituals, recipes, meditations, everything from like magical oils and salts and incenses that incorporate the stones within to more elaborate things like breaking curses, creating binding spells or defixio, the lead curse tablets, divination tools. I mean, there's really quite a lot in there, and I hope it empowers folks to think creatively about the other stones in their collections and not just the ones you find in this book.
And speaking of working with them and specifically like lead, would so beginners shouldn't feel nervous or anything picking this up like, oh, but lead is toxic. We're always talking about like lead based paints and don't eat out of lead bowls anymore. Like, so is it relatively safe to work with these things, or should beginners be like a little bit nervous?
I think So here's where I get to use my like mineral science background.
Yes.
I work in collections management. I handle a lot of materials that could be designated hazardous on a regular basis. I only really get nervous when two conditions are met. Something is radioactive, or something affects the air around it. So if it is powdered and full of heavy metals, if it off gases with like mercury compounds, or if it's something like asbestos, which breaks apart and yields fibers. But even with those really extreme examples, a little bit of PPE goes a long way. But with something like lead, um, yes, we should treat it with caution. And by that, I mean you should not ingest it. That's pretty much the end of the list. So, like, we're not going to make elixirs or oils by direct methods when we work with lead minerals. They're safe to hold for the most part, but just take care to wash your hands and wipe off any surfaces, just in case there are little particles. The general rule of thumb is that all minerals are dangerous to inhale, and most minerals are quite dangerous to ingest, whether that is something that appears inert like quartz, or something like uh, wolfenite, which is a lead molybdate with both lead and molybdenum in it. Both of those are dangerous to inhale. And in fact, silicosis is one of the most prevalent, we'll say, geologically incurred kinds of maladies out there, and it's also known as miner's lung, and it's from either mining or doing lapidary work without a mask, and you inhale silica or quartz particles. So I think a reasonable amount of respect is good for all minerals. But like a piece of flint, which is mostly quartz, is not dangerous to hold in the same way that a lump of more or less pure lead is not dangerous to hold. We just probably shouldn't scrape some dust off and snort it.
I think that's excellent life advice for a lot of things besides just stones.
So true.
So, you
Right.
can good tagline, like write that on all of your books. Just like, let's not lick it. Let's let's not lick it. Let's not snort it. That's probably good life advice. So in general, um, these this idea that like, oh, maybe it's like really toxic. It's not so much that, it's just having the proper respect for any of the items that you work with, stones included.
Exactly. And we see the same thing in herbalism, particularly medicinal herbalism, which eh, more savvy practitioners will use expressions like this is a low dose herb or this is a low dose ally. The implication is that in the right dose, just about anything is toxic. I mean, you can drink too much water and make yourself ill. You can certainly have too much caffeine and make yourself ill. And these are substances that many of us survive on, myself included, right? So it comes back to this old expression that it's something like dosis face venena, like dosage makes the poison. So if you're just handling something, a lead ore, like galena, lead sulfide, it's insoluble in acids. You're gonna be fine to hold it. It's also insoluble in water, therefore. But don't do anything silly with it. Just like you can grow foxglove and datura and angel's trumpet in your garden, but you're probably not going to enjoy the process of going out and like gnawing on the stems. Um, so it's just knowing the respectful interface.
And it's fascinating that, so many of these things, these stones have been used in magic and witchcraft for such a long time. And you can look back at like really old spells and it specifically says, like, don't try this today because our ancestors figured it out for us. So we don't have to suffer.
It's true. And, at the same time, I think if we approach things respectfully, intelligently, conscientiously, it does open up the path quite a bit. I'm not suggesting that we should go out and melt a whole bunch of lead and make as many curse tablets as possible. Probably not because it's the lead that's the problem, but it's the attitude that engenders the desire to do that might actually need working on. But historically, we have these kind of heavy hitting, hard hitting spells, rituals, themes in magic because life is not always cheerful and full of rainbows and crystals and sunshine. And there are appropriate responses to different situations in life. And so we can look to the historic record and find these kinds of ritual actions that might be useful in the right kinds of circumstances in life. And so I wanted to include some examples of maybe the baneful and the banishing minded work in this book to just have a, we'll say, broad cross section of the human experience represented and give you magical tools that meet those needs.
And that's fantastic because I think it is a part of life and it's a part of like practices. And if we're not including it in the standard books with like the tools that we're normally working with, then people are going to find that information elsewhere and seek it out from crazy sources. So when it's like already in what we're using, like you said, it's part of the human experience. We're going to go searching for that information at some point. So to have it in something like this, I think is really helpful.
For sure. And I also think we do beginners a disservice when we make it seem like these are forbidden practices. I think, they might be more skillful practices, but they're definitely not forbidden. And just knowing what goes into it and knowing why people have historically used things like binding spells or lead curse tablets is a really good indication that no matter where you go in the world and no matter at what point you look at in human history, people are people. Some people do these kinds of rituals for very petty things. Lots of people do these when they are subjected to oppressive systems, when they are the victims of injustice, inequity. And magic has always been a tool that equalizes that empowers the disempowered, that helps those who are disadvantaged come out with a little bit more leverage, whether that is in their finances, their social standing, their health. I mean, witchcraft is fundamentally about the human experience as supported by the more than human world. And so if we kind of take certain elements of it and make it seem forbidden or make it seem too dangerous, then we just breed this culture of fear around it. And instead, if we just approach it matter of factly, yeah, this is a thing that has happened. Some people still do this today. You may never have a need for it. That's it. But then if someone does have the need, they can approach it sensibly. They can approach it without it being made into something kind of over the top, scary, larger than life. And it will allow them to think more clearly and make informed decisions about what their magic, what their ritual, what their outcomes are going to entail.
I really appreciate when you include so much history in your books because I think that is such an important part of it that sometimes we can forget in our modern day and age. Like it just doesn't seem as interesting. It seems kind of like it's dead, it's over, it doesn't matter to me today. But it really is the foundation of everything that we're doing. So, did you, for this book in particular, did you already have all this like historical knowledge and everything that you included in here? Did you do a lot of research and was anything like completely new information? Were you like surprised by anything you had to include in here?
A little of column A, a little of column B, and a good amount of column C. I often choose books to represent the kind of learning I either am doing or want to be doing. So I'm always learning something and following research. And I think as the years go on, my ability to research improves. I think my job in academia is also coloring that, even though I'm not primarily doing this kind of research for work, it certainly has given me better access. So I was surprised at a number of things that wound up in this book. And just a couple of like really clear examples. Some of them are just historical data. For example, human beings have had salt works. In other words, have been able to derive salt from brine from aqueous solutions for more than 8,000 years, and that the need for salt in the human diet coincides with the beginning of agriculture and civilization. Without salt to supplement our diets, humans could not engage agriculture effectively because we just wouldn't get enough. And that was pretty wild. And it shows that salt is a really ancient and powerful thing. And of course, something that life preserving has been associated with similar kind of magic ever since. Another thing I found really fascinating um, is moonstone. I have never really done the deep dive on moonstone that I did in this book, and there certainly are some classical references to things whose names might translate as moonstone or epithets that we would attribute to moonstone today. But I actually have very little evidence that most of them ever actually referred to moonstone that we know. And I only discovered this when I went to go look for moonstone artifacts in um, museum catalogs and databases around the world, and I couldn't really find them before the modern period. I really was just hoping for like even a dozen or so really exquisite medieval moonstone anythings. And like a couple examples here or there, maybe a footnote in an archaeological paper about a dig in India, but like the idea of moonstone and magic and witchcraft is such a modern association. I mean, it pulls from older sources, but like we get this kind of inherited cultural love of moonstone in the modern witchcraft world from a kind of circuitous route that involves the rise of the Art Nouveau movement, influencing the arts and crafts movement, influencing the kind of modern counterculture, the hippie free love, the rise of neo-paganism, and it's a pretty modern association. I was also thoroughly surprised that it was an opera commentary about an opera, um, not sanctioned by the opera's composer, that creates the kind of final nail in the coffin that connects the Holy Grail to the emerald in the crown of Lucifer. And as a musician, that was also kind of mind blowing that this thing that I thought was also a very maybe ancient, and if not ancient, maybe medieval association was from the 19th century.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating to me too, because I wouldn't even have thought like I absolutely would think of moonstone specifically as being something that was like more ancient and magical and witchy that like we've had for hundreds of years associated with witches, and to find out that that's not true, that's a little mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, and definitely there are ancient things that were written about that we interpret as moonstone today, but we don't actually know the identities of those substances. If we read them very closely, some could maybe have been kind of like what we attribute to modern moonstone, members of the feldspar family. Some were almost definitely gypsum or chalk or some other kind of soft white calcareous rock. Some appear to have been things like jaspers and agates, maybe passing reference here or there was an opal, but almost none of them talk about the same substance. And therefore, moonstone today has inherited this literary tradition that encompassed a whole lot of rocks that were given these kind of mystical lunar attributions. And so we are still finding ancient threads in our moonstone lore, but it just came from other places.
I once again have to say how happy I am that you include like spells, rituals, like practices in your books, because I could absolutely get lost in history like that and just read that for books and books and then never put anything into practice. So always so glad in your books to have a reminder like, hey, put this to use. That's, it's wonderful to sit and learn about everything, but it's also meant to be used within your practice. So I absolutely appreciate having those right in front of me.
Oh, yeah, and they're honestly some of the most fun parts of it. So it was important to me when I wrote this book that I represented the kind of tradition of folk magic. So there's not a lot of high pomp and circumstance in here. It's things you can do without too many ingredients in most cases. And that also means, folk magic is the magic of the folk, of the people, that it's mostly related to real life stuff. There's maybe a few, we'll say, high level, more mystical things, but there's also things you're going to find pretty relevant to the everyday experience. And I wanted to, in many cases, kind of meet that in-between space where tradition and innovation collide. So you're going to find things that are almost perfect replicas of historic practice, and then you're going to find other stuff that is a modern reinterpretation, or in some cases, an altogether brand new spell inspired by a bit of folklore for which there was no ritual action recorded. And I had so much fun going through the creative process, generating all of these, and then practicing them, doing them, exploring what worked and what didn't, rewriting where I needed to.
Now, given your constraints that you started with and that you wanted to have the 13 chapters and you really had to sort of narrow the focus, were there any stones that got left out that you would really want to include, or is there going to be a part two coming? What's next on the horizon?
Well, I don't think there'll be a part two. If this book sells super well, that's a conversation to have with the publisher somewhere down the line. We've got the witching stones. Maybe there'll be, I don't know, the mage's stones, or even more witching stones, or I don't know, something silly like that. But ultimately, there were some B-sides in early development, so I didn't really do much writing on most of these. But I considered having sapphire in there, which was going to get complicated because the ancient thing called sapphire is not the thing we call sapphire today. I've also written a fair bit on the likely culprit, the almost certain culprit of the ancient sapphire, which is lapis lazuli. I wanted to have a nice fiery red stone in there, so I was thinking maybe having a chapter on carbunculus, the little coal in Latin, which usually referred to garnets, but could sometimes be a ruby or a spinel or another red gemstone. I thought sard or carnelian could be a good one to include. I really wanted a chapter on metals at large, and I settled for one just because it was going to be such a big, unwieldy chapter that I cut the option of other metals out to just focus on lead, because thematically it filled a gap that the other stones kind of didn't cover. But I was really excited to talk more about copper and iron in this book. So maybe one day I'll do something else with the kind of metallic side of the mineral kingdom. But it took a bit of finessing when it came down to like the last 3 or 4 chapters. I got the first like 8 or 9 in order pretty easily, but then when I was looking at the so-called more precious gems, I used up so much of the book on the less precious by modern day standards that I didn't know who was actually going to make it in there. And it was a toss up whether it was going to be amethyst or moonstone. Ultimately, I'm way happier that I chose moonstone. I learned a lot, and I've written enough about amethyst in the past that I think it was a good opportunity for me to do something different. But there's still some research to be done about some of these other stones, and it might get recycled, it might become a whole new project, it might turn into a class one day that runs long and needs a new home.
Fantastic. That's so exciting. I don't know how I would be able to, narrow it down like that. And you have so many ideas, but I love all of your books. So I am excited that you keep having ideas and keep sparking, because I'm like, I will read the next one.
Well, then I have good news, because of course there's more coming. So if anyone wants to see what's on the horizon, I do have a new book coming out in the springtime called Crystal Divination, and I wrote it with one of my favorite humans on Earth, Devin Hunter. So we put together this book, and it'll be out sometime in spring.
In spring. Okay. Well, I also love Devon Hunter, so I am absolutely putting that on my list as well to read for 2026. That's really exciting. And I do love the idea of crystal divination, because that's not, you know, one that people use as much. I think the go-to kind of is tarot, runes, maybe pendulum. So I am excited to have something new like that. That's going to be really exciting and fun.
Yeah, it was an interesting project because we approached it from just about every angle that you can. So, tradition meets innovation, very research meets experience, all the very kind of average tropes that I embody in my work. And then Devin is always bringing something new and exciting and creative to what he does. So you're going to see plenty of that in there. But there's lithomancy and dowsing and crystallomancy and sortilege or casting lots and additional kind of tools and ways that we can bring in crystals to our divination practice. It's got an appendix of 150 gems and their divinatory meanings.
Oh my gosh.
So
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was quite the effort to put together.
Labor of love.
Yes.
Well, sounds absolutely wonderful. And this book is wonderful as well, The Witching Stones. So I want to thank you so much for being here again today, for being on the podcast again and chatting with the audience again. I know they really enjoyed the first time that you were on. So I know that a lot of listeners today are going to be very excited to check out this newest book and to stay tuned in the spring as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. And if anyone wants to find a copy of The Witching Stones, I think just about any bookseller is going to have it for you. Your local indie bookstore, if they don't have it on the shelves, would of course be happy to order it. I hope it goes out into the world and meets the right audience to help them make more magic in their lives.
And listeners, as always, I am going to have everything linked below. So you can find Nicholas, you can find the book, check out the website, find all the old books that we've talked about. As always, that will be linked below and over in the show notes at witchwednesdays.com. That is everything that I have for you guys this week. I will see you all next week.
Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast, and you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.